Welcome, everyone, to the Strategy Execution Unlocked podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to kick off our brand new series, the OGs of Strategy Execution. In this series, we'll dive deep with industry pioneers, including industry analysts, founders of strategy execution management consultancies and product companies, and practitioners from each of the key functions and domains. All of these people have shaped the evolution of strategy execution over the years. Together, we'll explore what strategy execution truly means, how it has transformed, why organizations continue to face challenges, and what's on the horizon for this critical capability. Today, I'm excited to welcome our first OG of Strategy Execution, Andy Jordan. Andy, rather than me butchering your intro, why don't you share a bit about yourself, your role, and how that pertains to the evolution of strategy execution?
Thank you, Ben. I am honoured to be the first guest on this podcast, even if it is only because you couldn't find any pioneers, and I had to do. I'm an OG, I guess, because I'm old. My background started in banking, but we try not to talk too much about that, although it did teach me a lot of how not to do strategy execution. But I've been managing projects for 30 odd years now, and that sort of morphed into programs and portfolios and PMOs. And close to 20 years ago, I started working for myself, and that's morphed into sort of working with organizations around how they can improve project delivery, which it inevitably means also how they can improve the whole concept of strategy. I mean, at the end of the day, organizations do two things, right? They do operations, and then they do all the stuff that changes and improves operations, which is project and more senior strategic planning and execution. And everyone understands the idea, but no one seems to be great at actually sort of delivering on that concept of, this is what we want to do, here's how we're going to do it. Oh, look, we've achieved what we said we're going to do. Let's do the same thing again next year. There's always been problems, and it's easy to blame projects and project teams. And, we approved 200 projects because we should be able to do 200 projects, and we only completed 7 of them. Why aren't our teams working harder? Well, maybe that's not actually the problem. So I've been sort of working around the idea of strategy execution for a long time, and more recently sort of focusing in on it as organizations have started to recognize that, hey, we're getting better at this planning thing, but we're still not actually delivering. So maybe there is this issue around execution. And you and I obviously have had a number of conversations with that, and conversations that are also taking place with senior leaders in various businesses in different industries. And they're starting to realize that they're being held back by their own inability. And I think that there's a desire to do something about it, but it's hard. It's really hard, and I think that's sort of where we need to try and focus, and that's what I've been trying to do, and I guess that's one of the reasons why you asked me to join you today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you do have, I think everyone's approached strategy execution over the years from their own vantage point. I think you've, as you said, from your own practitioner viewpoint, consultancy, but also from my standpoint, you've always also reported on the space almost as an analyst as well, and worked across a lot of the product companies in the space too. So you have your own unique perspective. When I agree. When I established Strategy XF, it was kind of on a shared frustration that maybe organizations, as long as we've been collectively working this, haven't moved the needle enough in terms of their strategy execution capabilities. And I think strategy execution means different things to different people, right? You were talking there about the project execution, right? When I started to think about the challenges that I see, it's really the different functions across organizations all approaching strategy execution and the key to successful strategy execution. I talk about the 5 critical processes which have associated functions, whether that's portfolio management, project execution, business and enterprise architecture, as you look at the whole operating fabric of your business and look to transform that, as well as change management. It often seems to me that everyone's approaching strategy execution from their own specific domain and function, right? Where really it's about the multiplier effect of bringing all these functions together and building a cohesive operating model.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that organizations have consistently failed to realize that all of those different pieces are connected. You can't just focus on one element and ignore the rest. You have to look at how you handle your operations, how you handle the organizational change management element of it, how you plan and approve work, how you plan for resources, not just allocating your existing resources, but developing and hiring down the road. And all those pieces have to come together in an environment where you're also trying to deliver on operations. And some of the elements of effective and efficient operations are not always ideal for effective and efficient strategy execution. You've got to be able to combine the two. And I think that's something that is providing organizations with a lot of sleepless nights because they can't figure it out.
I mean, do you think there's an understanding at the exec level that of strategy execution and the impact it could be potentially having in terms of having suboptimal strategy execution capabilities in the organization?
I think there's an understanding that they need to get better. I think most organizations struggle with how they consistently get better. They try a few different things, but then run into challenges and back off or try something different or whatever it might be. And I think there is very little understanding of how significant the impact of ineffective, inefficient strategy execution is. I think if you were able to sit down some of these executives and say, you're losing this many millions or billions here, this much there, here's your opportunity costs, here's what you're wasting in work that's never going to achieve value, it would be terrifying for them because they just don't have any sense of how bad it is, or the flip side of that, how good it could be if they improved.
Yeah, I've just started looking at some research, not completely done, but what is the actual value at risk? If you have suboptimal strategy execution capabilities, and to me, that's the intersect of those 5 processes I was mentioning. Traditional or strategic portfolio management, both flavors of architecture, project execution of different flavors across the organization, as well as change management, right? But what is the actual value at risk of being lost and even deferred, right? And I think being able to communicate that to the senior folks is key, because from my perspective, I never fully understood why this hasn't become a top priority for organizations to develop that strategy execution muscle. And I kind of feel like it's a little bit like senior execs don't know how to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Or don't know how to affect that change or drive that change across the organization. Or even worse still, kind of ignoring that or see it as just a natural cost of doing business, right? The value is going to be left on the table.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that part of it, this is going to sound like a cynical perspective, but a lot of executives, especially in public sector companies or organizations that have external investors, they have to demonstrate improvement. They don't necessarily have to demonstrate excellence. So if they are showing that, hey, our return on strategic delivery this year is 2%, 3%, 5% better than it was last year, we're successful, we're doing well. There's no regard for the fact that it could be still 80% lower than it should be or could be. It's just, hey, we're getting better in absolute terms, maybe not in relative terms, therefore we're doing well. And I won't say that no one wants to get better, but I think that everyone wants to make themselves sound good, and it's easy to do that when you look backwards as opposed to look at what the opportunities are going forwards.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. When I think back to how I got started in this space, working, in management consultancies for, project management back then, right? I feel like that soon got developed into project and portfolio management, and it felt like IT was one of the first functions to kind of gleam onto that, right? Because they needed to do a better job of showing how they were aligning investments with strategy, to derive the most business value. And they had a general scarcity of money and resources, so they had to look at a systematic way of selecting the right investments that align with the strategy. Mm-hmm. And over let's say 2006 to 2012, there was kind of a professionalization of IT in terms of how they went about that, right? Whether that was from traditional PPM or the advent later in terms of the effects and benefits of agile, right, to an IT organization. I feel like there's a similar void today at the enterprise level, right? The enterprise may need to go through that same kind of professionalization in terms of how they plan and execute transformation or initiatives across an organization, recognizing the fact that, they've got to unite all these different functions in the organization that are key to delivering on that strategy.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that sometimes the business needs something to kick it up the whatever to get it moving in that direction. If you look at what happened in IT, you can track it all back to Y2K. You and I are both old enough to have been around for that there was such an anti-IT sentiment after all the time and effort and money that was spent on the wet squib of Y2K that IT had to reinvent itself and position itself as a valuable contributor as opposed to just a cost center that caused problems and stopped the business doing what it wanted to do. Agile came along soon after the year 2000, 2001. We saw the initial launch and that gained traction and that helped. But I think that it was that collective set of circumstances that drove the need to professionalize IT, and we've seen the progress that has come from that. I don't want the business to have to go through a similar sort of disastrous couple of years before there's actually realization of the need to change. We saw some degree of change, but I'm not sure how sustainable it's going to prove to be post-pandemic with the disruption that caused, but that was more around the operating side as opposed to the strategic side. And we now need to try and convince strategic leaders of the need to fundamentally reimagine, professionalize, to use your term, the discipline of strategy execution without having to go through the pain that forces that change upon them.
Yeah, and obviously we're throughout my career kind of witnessed PMO leaders or leaders of the different functions in the organization trying to achieve this by getting the ducks in the row for their own function, but struggling to really get the buy-in from the executive team that this needs to be an enterprise discipline and driving that change cohesively across the organization. Something that I've expected to see more of, and I think we're starting to see it now, is the advent of an enterprise function, which I'm terming, a strategy execution office, right? Mm-hmm. Not necessarily an enterprise PMO. It could come by many names, right? Maybe not an enterprise PMO, transformation office, strategy realization office, whatever. But the key is that enterprise function that recognizes strategy execution, not necessarily as an IT discipline, but an enterprise discipline. And how do you orchestrate all transformation across an organization and continuously optimize both operational activity and spend, discretionary activity and spend, right? But that function, direct line reporting to a CXO, whether it be a COO, CFO, whatever, that empower that function to drive the change across the organization. Are you seeing that change out there from your perspective?
It's happening slowly. A lot of the organizations are trying to think of the SEO or whatever label you want to put on it as a reinvented PMO or an elevated PMO. And I'm not sure that's the right approach. I think you're right. It needs to be a significant leadership-focused, leadership reporting, C-suite reporting function that is directly accountable for strategy execution. And that's not been there in the past. Executives have been accountable for strategy, but they wouldn't agree that they were accountable for strategy execution, but they wouldn't have anybody else who was. They'd have program managers and maybe portfolio managers and project managers who are accountable for elements of it, but no one who had that overall ownership. And you're not going to get that simply by elevating a PMO. PMOs are critical to the success of this. I mean, a lot of my career has been in PMOs. I love them, but they have to be the communication and execution arm of the SEO to actually sort of facilitate the work happening in all the different areas of the business, as opposed to that single body that's accountable for it. And I think that there's starting to be realization of that. There's certainly realization and awareness of the need for a strategy execution function. I'm just not yet convinced that a lot of organizations are going about it in a way that is going to be successful.
Yeah, definitely seeing the, as you say, the elevation of, let's say, an IT PMO, which may be the most mature PMO out there, being elevated to the enterprise, but then still bringing that important but often tactical mindset in terms of delivery. Whereas I think at the enterprise level, it's more around, what are we investing in? What's the value? When is it going to be delivered? Versus, what's the minutia of the project execution techniques to get us there, right? And also seeing, to me, one of the reasons why strategy execution has been held back over the years is this kind of adherence to one size fits all methodologies, right? I mean, we try to force PPM, traditional PPM, down everyone's throats from 2006 to 2012, right? Where, let's say someone was using Primavera, a construction company was using Primavera to build buildings, and their IT function started using Primavera back then, right? Because any PPM tool is better than no PPM tool, right? Then you started to see, 2012 and on, right? The advent of best of breed kind of web-based tools coming out and the same different functions in the organization using different tools that caused its own issue, right? But this kind of evolution into always having to have a one way fits all way of working has held us back. You've seen that lately with the push to agile and project to product, right? And I feel that enterprise function needs to embrace the fact that we need to understand what we're investing in, the value, when we're going to get it. The execution techniques may vary across the organization, so there needs to be that autonomy of governance, autonomy of execution within inside those guardrails, to ensure that teams can execute the way they want to execute. And that, to me, that enterprise function needs to understand program management, right?
Yeah.
Be that, of agile flavor, traditional flavor, hybrid, or all of the above, but also need to understand the other dimensions or processes need to come into play. Need to understand the role of architecture. Need to understand finance, HR coming into the picture to get the complete picture of the whole business.
Yeah, you can't separate a business into nice, convenient, siloed departments and expect things to work well. You have to recognize that everything is interconnected, that you can't do something over here and not have impact somewhere else in the business. Everything is going to impact everything else, and you need to manage it that way. You need to break down those silos. You need to manage holistically, and you need to recognize that every project is different, as I was taught back in 1990 something when I was first taught project management, and therefore it needs slightly different ways of delivering it, and you need to empower the teams who are delivering that at the project, program, portfolio, value stream, product, whatever level, to actually optimize performance. And you can't do that without also breaking down those silos and involving all those different parts of the business. You can't ignore business architecture or enterprise architecture when you're developing and delivering on a piece of work that's going to change how the organization operates in some way, because you're connecting all those pieces together and building the foundation for the next phase of all that work. And until that happens as an enterprise-wide function, as opposed to something that is in the domain of project or program management and is relatively self-contained, you're never going to be able to optimize the path forward.
Yeah, and I think, as we said some moments ago, right, the first step is to fixing a problem, admitting you have a problem, right?
Yep.
And that problem is a big deal, right? The value being lost is obviously a problem. Value being deferred could be equally as bad, right? It's impacting companies' results, financial performance, competitiveness, right? So developing that strategy execution muscle needs to become a priority, right? And I think the big difference is the only way to make significant strides forward is for the executive team to acknowledge that. Also, safe in the knowledge that they are not alone. I mean, we've both been doing this 25 plus years, right, I still struggle to find many organizations out there, even organizations I've worked with, that have mastered strategy execution. I don't think anyone has. So raising your hand and saying that we think our strategy execution our capabilities are suboptimal, it's not necessarily saying you're worse than your peers. It's just acknowledging that I think everyone's in the same boat, and we've got to do more with the investment we have to drive value, right? And I think that realization will result in, for the first time, the executive team empowering a function to actually drive that change in an organization versus individual domains trying to do the right thing but bumping into the political hurdles that obviously stop that from coming together. Right?
Mm-hmm. No one is consciously trying to underperform. A lot of organizations are consciously trying to get better, and they're not succeeding, not through a lack of effort, but more through a lack of understanding of the best way forward. And yeah, you and I have been doing this for a long time, and we're still doing it now because we haven't found this the gold and silver solution, whatever it is. We haven't found the magic sauce that allows us to just wave a magic wand and everybody's better. So let's figure out how to do it collectively, and many minds are better than one. So let's figure it out and help everybody moving forward.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I founded Stratgey XF for that exact reason. It was, am I going to create a company that says, look, this is the way to do it, or acknowledge the fact that there's not one person or one function that knows how to do it effectively, and being effective in organization A may result in organization B copying that may result in failure simply because it doesn't address the industry dynamics, culture of organization B, right? So let's figure out how to address some key principles to strategy execution, which may be different for one company to the next company, right? And learn together by integrating those key processes that I mentioned, but more importantly, unifying the teams that are managing those processes, right? The different teams and functions that need to come together to be aligned to build that cohesive or lean governance model to execute effectively.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the way forward. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who have created the 5-step process or the maturity model that's guaranteed to make you better. And it might be built on one particular company in one particular industry in one particular geographical location. It may work perfectly there. And you can apply it to other organizations and perhaps make them slightly better. And therefore, this is a great solution. No, it isn't. It's just a better way than you were doing it before. It's not what's right for you. One size doesn't fit anybody. You've got to take common concepts and understanding of how things need to work, a common acceptance of the challenges and problems and barriers that exist that prevent that optimization, and then find the unique combination of approaches and best practices and principles that work for your particular scenario so that you can improve it in your particular environment. And I think that's what this Strategy XF community thing is most exciting for me, because it's a way to bring everybody together and say, hey, let's figure out how to make it better for everybody, accepting that doesn't mean here's the solution that works for everybody. It's here's the solutions that work for different groups, and collectively, a rising tide lifts all ships.
Absolutely. So you may have your crystal ball. What do you think is next for strategy execution?
I think that there's going to be an awareness there's going to be an increased awareness that things have to get better. I think there's going to be an acknowledgement that small incremental improvements aren't enough. And as soon as one or two organizations start demonstrating execution excellence, perhaps because they've got involved in Strategy XF and have been able to leverage expertise from across the world and, improve the way their organization operates, you're setting a new baseline for what strategy execution can be. And suddenly the 1, 2, 3% improvements year over year aren't going to cut it. And there's going to be a new focus on how we can actually make it better. Technology is going to play a part, of course. AI is never going away, but it's going to come down to people working together to understand what excellence looks like in their particular circumstance and then try and deliver on it. And I think we're going to see a lot more focus on optimizing the possible as opposed to improving the practical. There's a sound.
Yeah, it makes sense. Oh, that's very good. Very good. Yeah. I was expecting you to say that don't worry about it, AI has got it, right? Going to solve world hunger and world peace. Right?
We'll all be unemployed by the end of the year.
Yeah. But I think generally I'm hoping we're at that kind of way of saying, look, let's come up with common sense ways of improving this. And, maybe it isn't the next silver bullet shiny methodology that just repackages the same things different ways. Maybe it's different approaches from different methodologies that work for one organization versus another, right? Because again, there's only so many ways you can reinvent the wheel, right? At the end of the day, it feels like we're both in the second half of our career, right? I'm seeing the same stuff play out again, packaged slightly differently than the first half of the career, right? And it's going to only result in getting us to the same destination, right?
I think it's something that needs to happen. It needs to happen quickly because the world continues to accelerate. Now, strategy execution is not new, but when I first started work back in the banking industry, you do 1 year of really radical disruptive change as you implement a new strategy, and then you do nothing for 4 years, just try and make it profitable and then do something different again. Now, the world's changing so quickly that strategies are evolving monthly, if not weekly. And we need to improve execution quickly, or we're losing a huge amount of not just real value today, but potential value tomorrow.
No, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for your time, Andy. It's great to catch up as always, and I know you're a member of the Strategy XF community, and are going to help people think through and pick through these problems. So that's definitely welcome. Let's pick up on the next episode of the OGs of Strategy Execution, where we'll be interviewing another pioneer, getting his or her perspective on what's going well and what's gone wrong and what's next. Andy, thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Looking forward to being part of the community.
All right, cheers then.